Hello, SPED 2010 students. So this last week, you had to turn in your co-teaching lesson plan and presentation. I've had a few questions about the due date. As you can see here, the due date is April 2nd, so that should mean that you should have turned it in actually yesterday on Sunday. So I sent an email out last week that talked about and elaborating a little further on what I expected as far as a timeline and then the difference between the lesson plan and the PowerPoint. So if you haven't watched or if you haven't read that email or opened it up to look at the video, please watch that. I also provided you with Quiz 2 study guide because Quiz 2 opens today, 8 o'clock a.m. Monday. So make sure that you look at the guide. I also provided you with the Quiz 2 PowerPoint review, which I found very helpful for students. Remember, it is open book because you're not in class. You can use your notes, you can use your study guide. So just make sure that you go back and you don't open the quiz until you feel comfortable and prepared and ready. A lot of students feel like they prefer having these open book or open notes tests, but one caveat to that is that it is a timed test. So if you're spending most of your time flipping through trying to find answers, your time is going to dissipate really fast and quickly. So that's something to think about. That's why I tell students you need to still study, be prepared. You can have that there for you in case you do get stuck on something, but it's important for you to prepare before you actually take the exam. So going into this week, as I mentioned, we are starting a new module or a new unit. We are on the last module of the term. So we're working in Module 4, Week 11. So I wanted to scroll down real quickly to assignments this week before we get into overview and everything we're going to be doing. So if you look here, I have a discussion for co-teaching strategy presentations. So what you have to do is once your classmates and your peers have presented and submitted their presentations, you're going to go through and you're going to look. Now remember, when you do discussions, you don't have to reply back to everyone. But what you're going to do is go through and read and watch the PowerPoint presentations from everyone's presentation, and then you're going to discuss that, right? So we'll get to that in just a minute, but I also wanted to just point out that this is part of your assignment, so you do need to make sure that you take part in this co-teaching strategy presentations, because I do take quiz questions on the very last quiz on our strategies for co-teaching, so it's something that I want to make you aware of. This week is also an opportunity for another reading assignment discussion or a RAD. So there are several people who have turned in 3, and this would be an opportunity for you to go ahead and complete a RAD. I just wanted to note that week 11, which is the week we're in, and then next week, week 12, that is your only options for remaining RADs. So if you've not done any, and you're just now getting started, and if you do this week and next week, that's only 2 RADs out of the 4 that you were supposed to complete. So just keep that in mind. So there's an opportunity. As always, I give you the rubric for the RAD. And then I went ahead and put a Nearpod quiz for the co-teaching models in here because I felt like it was important for students to have that feedback to make sure they understand the different types of co-teaching models. Okay, earlier in the semester, when we were going over the major assignments for assessment in this course, I provided you with the co-teaching models. This is going to dive even deeper into the co-teaching models, which will support you. Okay, and then of course, there's quiz 2. So I've had some questions about the dates. So quiz 2 is actually going to open April 3rd. And which is Monday today, and then it will close on Sunday, April 9th. So that's when you will be able to complete it by. You have that window of opportunity there to complete it. So that's pretty much what we have to do for this week's assignments. So let's go and look at your learning resources, the overview, and then the resources available to you to help you with So this week, we're really going to look at co-teaching models in special education. As I mentioned, as you were preparing this assignment, this was an opportunity for you to really dive into the different types of co-teaching. So we're going to take it a step further and look even more into co-teaching and why this is a research-based strategy. So they're usually about 6 co-teaching models, but we're only concentrating on 5. So one of our objectives is for you to be able to identify and give examples of the 5 models of co-teaching. And then I also want you to be able to identify the rationale for using these research-based teaching strategies. Now, these 2 objectives are going to help meet our course outcomes, right? So we need to be able to identify the different disability categories identified by IDA and Tennessee State Department of Education, and the various disabilities and how students with disabilities are unique. So with these teaching models, they're going to help us be able to support those students in those categories. And then your other course outcome goal is that you need to identify recommended educational strategies appropriate to children with exceptionalities in the inclusive classroom. Now remember, when we're talking about exceptionality, these are those with special needs. We were trying to get away from that term disabilities. But that is going to allow us to support those and give us strategies to use that's appropriate for those students with exceptionalities. And when we're talking about the inclusive classroom, we're really talking about classroom where you may have some students or a few students who have IEPs and the rest don't, right? So it's a mixture. So as I talked about our assignments, you're going to have to complete the co-teaching discussion board, which you will do and we'll talk about in just a moment. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you have an opportunity for a RAD, a reading assignment discussion. So what are you going to be graded on this week? Well, obviously, we have our quiz too, so that will be an assessment grade. You have an opportunity for a RAD. You have 4 to complete, so that's an opportunity to do an assessment. The other one is going to be your discussion board, right? So that is worth 10 points this week. Now, as far as your learning task or reading resources, I have an article here for you that says co-teaching to reach every learner, okay? And this is different than the article for your optional RAD, so I just want to make that clear. And when you get into it, you'll see that the optional RAD article is called Making Inclusion Work with Co-Teaching. The article that everyone has to read, regardless if you are doing a RAD or not, is going to be co-teaching to reach every learner. So instead of reading in your textbook, you're going to be reading the article. So I'm going to click on it so you can see. So this is the article I want everyone to read. Okay, it's about 6 pages, so it's not too bad. But I do want you to read that. So as you're reading this article, I really want you to make sure that you're taking notes and that maybe you're highlighting some important takeaways from this article. So anytime you're reading, I really want you to gain perspective, like, and get insight from the article or the readings. Like, what did I learn? What spoke to me? And try to connect it to you as a future teacher in the classroom. Okay, so that's what you will be doing. You also have some resource videos that we're going to go over that I want you to watch. They're not very long, but I feel like they help you gain a better understanding. And it talks about the 6, even though we're only going to be identifying examples of 5 of them. And then, of course, I talked already about your opportunity for a RAD. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back into week 11. So when you click on it, this is what you're going to see. We just went through the overview. We went through the reading article. So when you click on it, you'll see that. Now we're getting into the 2 videos I gave you. So the first video is a co-teaching video. So this is an overview that walks you through the co-teaching models. The second video is going further in and gives you examples of the 5 teaching models, co-teaching models. And these are the videos that I shared with you before. That way, when you're working on your assignment with your partner or preparing your lesson plan if you chose to do this alone, then you would know what roles each teacher would play depending on what strategy you wanted to teach with, right? So you have team teaching, alternative teaching, parallel teaching, station teaching, one teach, one assist, or one teach, one observe. Okay. And when you were doing your co-teaching assignment, you had to choose 2 of these models to use in your lesson plan. I also provided you with resources. So in the resources, when you click on that, you're going to come across one web page, which I feel like is useful. It goes over the 6 models of co-teaching, right? And it has some links in here for you, so be sure to look at this. And if you scroll down further, you're going to see a definition and a little bit more in-depth knowledge of what those look like, right? So what does this actually look like? So if you were doing team teaching, this is what it would look like in the classroom, right? And it talks about the benefits, the challenges, and when you should actually use team teaching. So when you want to use team teaching, this means that both of you are staying in front of a room and you move about to see students need help, right? So you both are doing it together. It does have some benefits, right? So both teachers have an active instructional role, right? And if you two have the same kind of teaching style, this would complement your personalities. You know, it allows 2 people to be teaching different teaching styles, and that's giving students multi-modality. Different types of learners may like that. And it allows students to get the information in more than one way. So when you're presenting in it, it allows them to engage with it in multiple ways. And it allows students to be successful and collaborate. And they see that as a model, what that looks like working with someone. And it really allows you and the teacher you're working with to pursue those teachable moments that may arise that maybe if one teacher was doing that, that wouldn't happen. Now, there are challenges that come along with team teaching. So, you know, you have to have a great relationship. You really need to be complementary one another. There doesn't need to be an alpha male or alpha lady because you will butt heads, right? And it takes a lot of planning time to team teach, right? So coordination of schedules, you both have to sit down and plan together. And this is something that takes more time than most people want to do. And it really makes both people have a responsible role, right? So that just means that not only do you have to plan together, but you have to grade the assignments together. You have to create rubrics together, how you're going to assess the assignments. What assessments are you going to use? So these things take a lot of work on the front end. And then it talks about when should you use this? Well, whenever you have learning content and skills that involve students being able to get it in multiple ways or multiple strategies. So then it talks about parallel teaching, right? Which really works to differentiate instruction really well. Right, so whenever you're teaching content, it can be challenging when you're trying to differentiate. So differentiate means that you're trying to make sure that you meet the needs of all learners. So when you're doing parallel teaching, that might be the best way to start co-teaching. You're teaching the same information at the same time. Right? So you can still plan together and you're still covering the same material, but you're really cutting your class in half. Right? So one person's getting half, the other person's getting half. Okay, and then if you hit continue reading, again, it goes through, well, what does this look like? Well, you are going to divide the class into 2 groups. One teacher takes one group, the other teacher takes the other group. And each teacher, again, will have an active instructional role. This makes the student-to-teacher ratio easier. So you'll have a smaller number of students to teach instead of a large class of 25 or 30, say. And this really allows for more intense instruction as far as small group, right? So children who think and learn differently, this is going to be really nice to accommodate those students. And it gives children more of a time to have a voice to ask more questions. They have more time spent with you instead of sharing you with lots of students. And this is a really time to think about how are you wanting to group the students up when you divide the class. It makes you look at the different varying abilities. It makes you look at students have IEPs. It looks at their strengths, the challenges. It makes you look at all these things. And then it really allows you to really get a sense of that rigor. If it's a demanding lesson, this is really going to help those students. Now, of course, there are challenges you have to think about. Like, it requires both teachers to have strong knowledge of the content, right? So they both have to be really well versed in the content. They have to really think about the noise level, right? When you're working, is it going to be distracting? Because you're going to be in the same classroom, even though you're in two groups. And then when you're thinking about when should I do parallel teaching, it's really going to be when there's a large amount of information being covered in one lesson and there's a lot of rigor to it. So that's when you could use the parallel teaching. Now, station teaching is where you're going to have more than two groups. So parallel, of course, we do where one teacher gets half the class, the other teacher gets the other half. But in station, it's almost like literacy stations. You're going to set up multiple station or groups throughout the room. So you're going to have multiple learning centers going at the same time. And what happens is, and most teachers use like a stop time, like a timer. And what they'll do is that students will spend so much time in a station and then they'll rotate through the stations. So the teachers are going to teach the same material, but they're going to do it in different ways depending on the needs of the students, right? So for instance, one station might be where you have a group where you're working on fractions, right? A fraction line. And then at the other one, you may have manipulatives. Okay, so one station you're going to have teachers, the other one may be where there's a group and then the other teachers focusing on more independent work for that group. So it's really going to take a lot of planning on your time to make sure you're meeting the overall goal. So when you're setting up station teaching, you're going to realize that these are different learning stations. And you have to make sure you go back and look at, there's going to have to be one teacher present for independent student work, right? And one there kind of helping the other students when you're active in those manipulatives. So there are a lot of benefits to think about this as using as a strategy. So the benefits are, of course, both teachers are playing an active instructional role. This, again, lowers the student-teacher ratio. This allows students to be more actively engaged. It increases that engagement. Teachers are allowing students to be able to use materials in different ways to be able to meet the objective. This is supporting really a universal design for learning approach to teaching. This is allowing you to be more flexible with your grouping, right, to meet the needs of the students. It's going to allow you to cover that material, but in a shorter time frame. And then really, it provides that clear responsibility that that teacher has in the room. Now, there are challenges, just like the other co-teaching strategies or models. So one is it could be really loud and noisy and distracting for students. And these are things to think about with our exceptional children. Like, is noise too much for them? So these are things to think about when you're planning with your co-teacher. You also have to think about that whenever you have station teaching and you are timing this out, some students are going to move at different paces. So that group may not be finished working when that timer goes off. So these are things you have to consider when you're planning. Another thing to consider is that the amount of planning and material preparation that's involved in this. So really thinking about not only what manipulatives are you using, what are your objective and goals and standards you're covering, but you also need to think about, you have to think about provocations, what's developmentally appropriate, where your students are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what materials are you going to use that's best suited for that station. And then the last one to think about is this really requires you to pre-teach, right? So there's expectations surrounding how we do stations and moving around the room. What's the expectations when you're working independently at the station? So these are things that you have to build into your lesson, and that have to be taught to the student ahead of time. And then, when should we be using station teaching? Well, when you have lots of depths of knowledge, right, on a topic, and you feel like students would benefit from having differentiated instruction. So that would be a good time to use the station teaching. The next one is alternative teaching. So this is where one teacher is going to instruct most of the students, so mostly whole class. And then the other teacher may take a small group of students and she's going to modify that, right? So it's really going to look like big group and little small group teaching. So both are responsible for students, but the students are getting it in a different way. So this would be beneficial if maybe you have some gaps where students maybe have a learning disability or quite aren't getting the content in their core block area. That would be a good time to pull those students, okay? So when you are seeing what this looks like in a classroom, you're going to have, of course, that one teacher that's going to be the teacher with the large group. So she's providing that large group instruction, where the other one's going to be pulling that small group in a different space in the classroom. So once again, there are many benefits. So this allows for a lower student-teacher ratio because you're pulling that small group out. This gives you a chance to reteach a skill maybe that they're not getting in the core instruction. Maybe it's a chance for you to review something or even pre-teach vocabulary. So think about the students who need extra support or those ELL students. They may need you to pre-teach them something before they can get into the core content. So these are things to think about as well. This lets you use flexible grouping. This also allows for you, like I mentioned earlier, to pull students for intervention, right? So they can have more enriched opportunities. Okay, so don't only think about the students who struggle. Think about the students who maybe are high achieving, right, or exceptional children that you maybe pull for enrichment opportunities. So just think about that as well. And of course, this allows you to pull those struggling students out without actually singling them out and let them know that it's something different going on. Of course, there's challenges in all these co-teaching models. So with this alternative teaching that we're talking about, one of the challenges you're going to see is that students might catch on that, hey, this person and these other people and me are always getting pulled out, okay? Especially if it's the same small group being pulled. They're going to catch on real quickly that they're not up to par where they should be. And that might make them feel self-conscious, or maybe they don't like being pulled away from the group, the large group. So that may be something to think about. Another thing is if it's going to be too distracting or too noisy for that small group when the teacher's doing something over here. So you need to make sure that you have a lot of data collected, right? So thinking about back to RTI, the tiered interventions, right? So you have to have that data from them so you know which groups you need to pull for a small group. And then planning really is going to take a lot, because you're going to have to really carefully plan to make sure students don't miss things in the large group that they need. So that's where you're going to have to plan together. And the last model I really want you to be able to find and give me examples of is the one teach, one assist. So this is one that's used most often. This is really helpful if you have a lot of behavior management, behavior issues, and you need to manage behavior, right? So this allows for additional support. So with one teach, one assist, you have to make sure that you're not making the other teacher feel like one of your teacher aid or assistants, right? So you have to make sure that both teachers are able to teach content but provide support. So you have to switch that role out, okay? So what you need to think about is which students need extra support during the lesson that are struggling. So when you're doing one teach, one assist, here's what it will look like. One teacher's in the front of the room with the large group, where all students are together, so no one's getting pulled out. The other teacher is really going to roam around the room and assist students as needed. So these could be people who are struggling. This could be people who maybe need a little extra assistance. It could be those who have behavior issues. So this is going to allow students to have real-time help, because remember, if you have a group of, say, 27 students and there's one teacher, you can't help everyone sufficiently like you need. Whereas if you have two teachers, then you both can be able to help students and answer questions. And this really allows you to stay in proximity. Proximity is so important as a teacher, because you have to remember that that can stop a lot of behavior from happening. So if you're like within reach of them or standing next to them, that might make them think twice before that behavior ensues. So like I said, it helps with classroom management. Also, really allows you to do some observations. Observing students is so important. That's actually part of doing data collection. So there's direct data collection and indirect, okay? So when we talked about behavior in week 7 and 8, we were talking about indirect being a lot of those interviews, right, that we did. But also indirect observations can be part of data collection. So you can go around the room and make notes. And this could be academic notes, this can be behavior notes, and this is going to help you figure out those challenging behaviors, whether you need to go more formal and conduct ABC analysis, whether you need to do a frequency data collection analysis. So it allows you to have that key information you need to help plan. So as always, there's challenges. So one of the challenges is that we can see one teacher feeling like, especially if you are not switching out the roles, that they're the assistant. One person is superior than the other and in charge, and that's not what you want to do, because that can hurt your relationship, especially if you're supposed to be together the entire year. So the dynamic you create is important, and you're modeling that to the students, right? So you're making it seem like if you're the one that's always doing it, and then the person you're working with is always observing or managing behavior, students might start to see the teacher that manages behavior, right, as the sole teacher and not the other one. Or they may see it as, you know, both of you don't teach and both of you are not the teachers. So these are things you have to be careful of. What dynamic are you creating and modeling? The other thing is that you really have to make sure that there's expectation in place about you're supporting those students, whether it be behavior or academic, otherwise, that those expectations are set up, that there's always someone there to support those students. Again, this requires an extreme amount of preparing and planning on your part, and supporting one another and being efficient when you're doing this. So when should you use this? Well, you should only use this when you are very comfortable with a teaching strategy. So any kind of strategies you've tried, if this is one that you feel is useful and works really well, then you can use it. The last one is one teach, one observe. Now, people get these confused. One teach, one assist, we really look at support for learning or behavior management, right? Because sometimes we call this one teach, one support. On one teach, one observe, you are strictly observing, right? So you really aren't playing that support role. So one teacher is the primary instructor during this time. The other one's collecting data. Now I mentioned you can collect data up here, but the sole focus of this one is to really support that learning or behavior. So when you're doing solely observations, those indirect observation and collecting data, or if say you are doing a direct observation, so say you're conducting the ABC analysis, this would be a great time to use this strategy. So like I said, the first teacher, the main teacher is going to be teaching. So one will be responsible for the instruction. The other one is going to be collecting data and observing students. So why do we collect data? Well, it helps us see how to guide our lessons and plan appropriately. So what should take place next? Like, what are the students seem to be struggling with? Do they seem to be engaged? Does it seem like everyone is mastering the skills? Does it seem like there's a lot of questions taking place? What are their interests? So this really helps guide your planning. Also, it allows you to see which students need help. It allows you to know what the needs are and being able to identify them. This is helpful to also collect data for those students who have IEPs or 504 plans, or like I mentioned earlier, if you're doing those functional behavior assessments and you're trying to create a behavior intervention plan. Also, you may need to do this when you're collecting data for your RTI. So we said what it looks like. The benefits are, we already mentioned, it helps for data collection, right? So this allows you to do it uninterrupted because you're not going to be bothered with supporting them at that time. Your sole responsibility is going to be getting that data. The next time, the other benefit is that it allows you to plan for future instructions, intervention, and grouping. So there are challenges. So if you don't have a strong relationship with that teacher, it's going to be hard for you to have that great dynamic, right? So the students are going to start to see as though that's the real teacher, right? And the other one's just the assistant. And also you lose that chance to have instructional opportunities, right, in a true co-teaching classroom. So when should you use this? You should use this when you need to gather information at any time. So this would be data collection. You can use this for collecting data for IEP meetings or functional behavior assessments or RTI, or when you want to see how the students are responding to what's being taught. So the next section here is really talking about making co-teaching work, right? So to make it work, you have to do these things. You have to plan who's doing what. You both have to agree on the expectations for the students. You have to understand the needs of all your students. So that means you both have to know the IEPs in and out, the 504 plans. You have to know the accommodations in your room. You both have to attend the IEP meetings because you both share those responsibilities. The next thing to make it work is to think about signposting, okay? So both of you have equal opportunities to teach. Both of your names should appear on the door. Both students have to see you as both their teachers, that you are a team. And collaboration, I cannot stress that enough. You both have to spend time preparing and reflecting on lessons. You both have to communicate really well with each other and be respectful and supportive, okay? The next thing is really you need to involve your administrator because there may be issues that come up or challenges, and if you don't involve your administrator, it's really going to be hard to move forward. So that's under the resource page. The other resource I gave you is a website called Friendship Circle. So this is about how co-teaching really benefits those who have special needs, right? It defines co-teaching, the benefits, the different models, which we talked about. So this is another great resource for you as well. Okay, and all that can be found under the resources page. There is not a PowerPoint presentation. There is a presentation for a Nearpod quiz. So you'll see it underneath assignments. So just make sure you do that because it gives you feedback on the different co-teaching models. So I told you we were going to talk about your RAD. So here it is. So this is the article that goes with your RAD, Making Inclusion Work with Co-Teaching. So you're going to read this, and then you will complete your discussion. So remember, this is optional. You have to do 4 in all. So when you get done reading the article, the same prompts are here as they have been for all the RADs. So you felt like 2 or 3 most important concepts for you as a future teacher was, and then why. What one thing that you're not clear on from the reading, and one thing you'd like to ask your classmates. Now remember, you have to respond to at least 2 classmates' posts. So just make sure you realize that too. Okay, so the last thing I wanted us to look at, I told you, was going to be the discussion for co-teaching. So this is where you have a possibility of 10 points. So this is part of your assessment, right? And then if you need an optional RAD, that's part of assessment too. So for the co-teaching strategy presentations discussions, what you have to do is you have to go through and watch everyone's presentation for their co-teaching assignment. So when I say presentation, I'm talking about the PowerPoints, right? You you don't have to go in and read their lesson plans. What you're going to do, and I'm going to post them for you, right? So if you see, let's see, if you're in week 11, as you're watching them, most of them should be posted. So if you look under week 11, underneath co-teaching strategy presentations, I'm going to put them there. So that's where you'll be able to access them. So it'll be under assignments and you'll see co-teaching strategy presentations discussion. You click on it, you get the discussion. Underneath it is where I'm going to put the presentation. So don't freak out. You can go back and watch this. You're like, it's not there. It will be there. So the presentations, you will watch only the presentation because that's all I'm going to give you. I'm not giving you the lesson plans. Once you watch them, you are going to complete the discussion board. So within the discussion board, I want you to think about what strategy would you like to incorporate into your own classroom? What's something that you would like to know more about? And then I want you to pick one strategy and tell me how it can help students in the classroom. So when we're talking about how it can help students, I want you to think about all the different types of students we've learned about, right? So those with exceptionalities, that have IEPs or special needs, think about the students who maybe have behavior issues. So think about those types of students. How can any of these strategies that you've looked at, pick one of them and tell me how it can help students. After you post, you're going to respond to at least two students or two classmates discussion post. All right, guys, so that is week 11. One thing I also want to remind you one more time about, I've mentioned twice, is that this week, today, Monday, April 3rd, is when Quiz 2 opens, and it will close Sunday, April 9th, right? To get the review, it is under week 10 in Module 3. If you go back 1 week, you're going to see under assignments, I have provided you with the study guide as well as the PowerPoint review. All right, guys, I know this was a long video, but it was important since we didn't have a PowerPoint for me to talk through a lot of those resources and what it really meant for co-teaching and what that looked like. So as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And until next time, guys, take care.